Mr. Deputy Speaker, dear award recipients, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anita Brodén. I'm a member of the Swedish Parliament and represent the Liberal Party. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Gene Sharp, born in Ohio in the United States of America. Dr. Sharp has for a very long time worked for non-violent solution and democracy. He was jailed for 9 months protesting conscription in the Korean War 1953. He witnessed China's Tiananmen Square uprising in 1989 and snuck into a rebel camp in Burma in the 1990s. Dr. Gene Sharp is very well known also as an author of a handbook for non-violence actions. From dictatorship to democracy, this handbook is now translated into 34 languages. The Wall Street Journal describes this man as having had a broad influence on international events over the past 2 decades, helping to advance a global democratic awakening. I want to welcome the academic writer and Machiavelli of nonviolent resistance, Dr. Gene Sharp. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, distinguished sir, without whom all of this and much more would not have been possible. Mr. Deputy Speaker, honorable members of Parliament, fellow laureates, and friends, sometimes old friends I haven't seen for a long time, because this is not my first visit to Sweden. I wish to begin by thanking the Right Livelihood Award Foundation for the great honor of this award. I wish also to thank Michael True for the nomination for the award. But I think this award might be less a recognition of what I have tried to do for a very long time, but a recognition of what has been happening in the world in these past very few years. The subject matter of nonviolent struggle, which was always mispresented, misunderstood, and largely ignored, even in especially in our history books. That has now changed. And with the award of the Arab Spring in Tunisia and in Egypt and on beyond, there is now a great hunger for knowledge about this phenomenon. And this is new. But the hunger is without all the old misconceptions as to what it was. Violence in our world is so common and mostly, get rid of this damn cane, is mostly accepted. Violence in our world, military means mostly accepted without question. At times it seems to be a permanent part of reality. And those of us who want the future to be different are often relegated to a role of irrelevant objectors, able only to dissent. And dissent is important, able to dissent but unable to actually achieve a change away from the heavy role of violence in political practice. This situation can lead us to accept that reliance on violence is inevitable and beyond our control. That conclusion is a grave error. During the past century and long before, at times people have found another way to fight when they needed to struggle for various objectives. In those limited situations, the use of violence shrank or disappeared, not because it was evil, but because it wasn't needed anymore. The violence had been replaced with nonviolent struggle. Nonviolent struggle or nonviolent action includes 3 categories of methods, specific means of acting. 1, the methods of nonviolent protest that are symbolic activities, such as marching down the street or displaying certain colors. But this technique, if it had only that, wouldn't be worth much. It also includes the much more powerful methods of non-cooperation, such as social boycotts, economic boycotts, labor strikes, political boycotts, civil disobedience, and thirdly, the methods of nonviolent intervention and disruption, such as sit-ins, fasts, and the creation of new institutions. This technique, this is important. This technique is identified by what people do, not by what they believe. And many of the people who have been so brave in nonviolent struggles that have changed the world in many ways have believed in violence, but they found the nonviolent struggle as an expedient way to accomplish something because it would work better. That's turning something on its head. Such actions in nonviolent struggle have been used by various types of opponents, against various types of opponents, including employers, governments, and dictatorships. Rarely an individual takes such action, but almost always is a group, scores of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people, and we have seen even millions of people acting together. Throughout the centuries, despite its ignorance in history books, people have waged this kind of struggle with modest effectiveness, not perfect, but modest effectiveness. Because the resistors have had limited knowledge and understanding of this operation of this type of technique. How does it work? They had no guidebooks on how to plan strategy. They didn't even have lists of do's and don'ts. Sometimes this type of conflict was used where it was not expected. For example, in Nazi-occupied Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, and elsewhere, and even Berlin to save Jews in 1943, successfully, it should be known, a demonstration by women who were married to Jews, who got their Jewish husbands brought back from camps, even the camps where the extermination gas chambers existed. It was once thought that the peoples of Eastern Europe and Central Europe would be living under communist rule for decades if the West did not launch a military invasion. There was no military invasion, but now the people of Poland, East Germany, the former Czechoslovakia, and other countries are recognized as having freed themselves without a war of liberation. Most remarkable of all are the little nations of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. These were no softies. These people who had been suffering under oppression for almost many, many years conducted brave guerrilla warfare against both the Nazi occupation and the Soviet Union. Brave, but not successful. Then came a new situation, and they improvised their methods of protest, linking arms, so sending side by side, all the way from Vilnius in the south to Tallinn in the far north in Estonia. And then they used a new strategic understanding from my then new book. It wasn't even off the press yet. My new book, Civilian-Based Defense. The governments planned their resistance strategically, exited the Soviet Union with minimal casualties. And if you think it was easy to get out of the Soviet Union or Russia, look at Chechnya. In contrast, these brave people who used not only their hearts and their inspiration, but their heads. In Lithuania, I think there were 14 dead. In Latvia, 8, and in Estonia, none. And they got out of the Soviet Union. In early 2011, the predominantly nonviolent victorious revolutions against long-entrenched autocratic regimes in Tunisia and Egypt launched what became, but they didn't know in advance, the Arab Spring. These struggles were stunning in their mass mobilization, nonviolent discipline, not perfect, but very important, fearlessness and speed. It was once thought that nonviolent means take forever and violence is fast. We know that's not true anymore, along with a lot of the other preconceptions. Now, there's a widespread growing hunger for knowledge about nonviolent struggle, fueling an increased demand for publications and other resources. New books and old books are revealing a technique of great power with insights into its history and understanding of how it operates. The Arab Spring and other developments have let the genie out of the bottle, and it cannot be put back in that bottle of ignorance again. The knowledge of how to cast off oppression nonviolently is now known and is spreading. People are abandoning violent options, not because they're immoral, but because they don't work well. There is something better and more effective they can do. The dramatic interest from the media in our work at the Albert Einstein Institution in the wake of the Arab Spring revealed an amazing new reality. Nonviolent struggle is finally achieving the serious attention and consideration it's long deserved. It should be noted that in those months, from April on, several dozen reporters from various countries who contacted us all had a basic, accurate understanding of the nature of nonviolent struggle. This was 4 to 7 reporters, print press, radio, and television from all over the world, quite literally, who came for 6 to 8 weeks. And not one of those dozens and dozens of reporters had any of the old preconceptions that were simply not true, that had changed. And it's significant that their editors must have anticipated that the public wanted to read about that new phenomenon. They thought it was new. It wasn't. And that plan of struggle. We now know that the type of struggle does not require a gentle opponent. And the British, by the way, in India were not always gentlemen. We know that nonviolent struggle does not require a charismatic leader or a Mahatma. We know that nonviolent struggle for effectiveness requires nonviolent discipline, but we now know people can do that. It requires bravery, but probably no less than military struggle in some ways, the opposite of the usual preconceptions. We thought it required a single person as a strategic genius to tell people what to do. We now know that is not true. We now know that nonviolent struggle can work quickly, as in Tunisia and in Egypt, not solving all problems forever, but a major substitute for violent struggle. We know all those preconceptions are now false. They are not true anymore. So don't give me that same nonsense that I heard 50 years ago. Effective nonviolent struggle is now known to be possible, more possible than was earlier believed, and it can be done. Nevertheless, almost all governments, with rare exceptions, retain their irrational faith in the omnipotence of violence, and therefore drag their peoples into disasters. The new governments working towards independence in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania are exceptions for this. There it became government policy to use nonviolent resistance, and the Latvians, by the way, have issued a major study about that thick on their role of nonviolent resistance in achieving the restoration of independence for Latvia. But all these sources of power of all governments rest on identifiable sources. You can find out where does it come from, what gives it power. And when you identify those sources, whether it's moral authority and legitimacy, control of the economic system, human wisdom, working for changing the society, to operate even these systems of oppression, that requires help and support. But all those sources of power are dependent upon cooperation and submission and obedience of people and institutions, and that source and support can be removed, as it has been. That was why the Quisling regime failed in Norway, despite the Nazi occupation and the presence of the Gestapo and the German army. That is why it brought Quisling to school in Saarbeck after the teachers had destroyed his effort to establish the cooperative state by bringing all the teachers under centralized control. And he went down to Saarbeck and brought the teachers down to the first floor of the school building and stormed and raged at them, as one of the teachers in that struggle told me. And he said, "You teachers have destroyed everything for me." It's not what a great fascist leader usually says. People now know they have a tool, they have a technique that cannot be taken away from them. Some struggles bring down, nonviolent struggles bring down an oppressive regime, and then something goes wrong. As when the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia in October 1917, after the nonviolent struggle had brought down the Tsar system completely. And how the Ayatollahs seized power in Iran after the brave nonviolent defiance brought down the Shah. We have warned that that is a danger signal. It is a danger time. You've got to be very careful and very cautious. That's why we have done what I think there is nothing else like it, a guide to how to prevent coup d'etat and executive usurpations and how to defeat them if they occur. It's called the anti-coup. It's on our website, aeinstein.org, and it's coming out in new languages soon. It's already in some other languages. But it's important that the achievements of this type of technique of people power be accurately recorded. Already in Norway, the heroism of the people, of the teachers and the clergy and the workers is being trivialized as well, not too important. It was supposedly the boys in the mountains who did it. With all respect to their courage and their sufferings, it was the people of the society who did it in their institutions. And that needs to be remembered because we can learn much from that. It's necessary to learn how to block foreign military interventions in nonviolent struggles, whatever the real motive, that can derail the collapse of the oppressing regime and help it to maintain its rule. Foreign military assistance can also give the foreign military forces major control of the ongoing struggle and, if successful, the future society. So instead of accepting military intervention, nonviolent struggle movement needs to intensify its self-reliant efforts to paralyze or disintegrate the oppressing regime. Now, much has been learned about the nature and potential of nonviolent struggle. And there's still a lot to be learned. Many dangers remain. Major efforts are required to spread the knowledge of how to defeat those dangers and how to increase the effectiveness of nonviolent struggles. A future of domination, the rule of violence, and popular helplessness. I once lived in a not very fancy area of Brooklyn in New York, and then you get in conversation with people there. It always ended So what you going to do? And it's not only the people of Brooklyn in that section who had that experience that their efforts had never succeeded. But now people around the world are not thinking, so what you going to do? No, what are we going to do? It's a different attitude. They're learning how to do it and how to achieve. And we hope we have played a small role in that, if we want to do it in the future. We're now at a new stage in the practice of nonviolent struggle and the recognition of its potential. If we take wise, responsible steps in the coming years, the future will reveal achievements beyond all that we now can even imagine.